Number 2. The Pillow Pyro. On October 10th, 1984, a hardware store in South Pasadena, California, was destroyed by a major fire. The fire started in a section of the store containing highly flammable polyurethane products, which caused it to spread rapidly. 4 people were killed in the blaze. 2 were employees, one 26 years old and the other 17, and 2 were customers, a 50-year-old grandmother and her 2-year-old grandson. In the aftermath of the fire, investigators from around Southern California converged on the destroyed store and declared the blaze an electrical fire caused by faulty wiring. However, this verdict was not unanimous, as one of the investigators, an arson investigator from Glendale named John Leonard Orr, insisted that the cause was arson. He also claimed he knew the identity of the arsonist, but could not prove it. In January of 1987, there was a conference for arson investigators in Fresno, California. During the conference, several strange fires broke out in Fresno and surrounding cities. The first was in a display of sleeping bags in a Fresno drugstore, and the second in a linen shop across the street. At another mysterious fire in a craft shop in Bakersfield, authorities discovered the remains of a primitive incendiary device, a cigarette and matches held together with a rubber band. It was suspected that the arsonist placed the device close to flammable objects and lit the cigarette before walking away. The cigarette would burn down to the matches, igniting them, which would in turn set fire to the flammable objects nearby. Because these fires had been set while a conference for arson investigators was in town, authorities suspected one of 2 things. Either the arsonist was deliberately taunting them, or he or she was one of their own, or perhaps both. Captain Marvin Casey of the Bakersfield Fire Department was certain that the arsons were the work of one of the experts attending the convention, but he lacked any evidence to prove it. In March of 1989, there was another conference for arson investigators, this one held in Pacific Grove. As before, there were outbreaks of arsons in stores in and around Pacific Grove, and the same simple incendiary devices, a cigarette and matches, bound together with a rubber band, and sometimes wrapped in paper, were recovered. This time, however, investigators had an additional clue. A partial fingerprint was recovered from one of the devices. By this time, authorities were certain that a rogue arson investigator was responsible for the fires. The unknown arsonist had been given the nickname the Pillow Pyro by investigators due to his penchant for setting fires in linen stores. A list was compiled of investigators who had attended both the 1987 and 1989 conventions, and it contained 10 names. However, none of those 10 could be matched to the partial fingerprint, bringing the investigation to a standstill. 2 years later, in 1991, improvements in fingerprint matching technology led investigators in the newly created Pillow Pyro Task Force to re-examine the fingerprint evidence, and this time they matched the partial print to one of their 10 initial suspects, John Leonard Orr. The decision was made to not immediately arrest Orr, but to place him under surveillance and gather more evidence. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, abbreviated as the ATF, placed a tracking device under the bumper of Orr's vehicle, which he discovered and removed. However, he failed to discover a second tracking device installed in his vehicle's dashboard. In early December of 1991, after Orr was present at the scene of a suspicious fire, the decision was made to end the surveillance and place him under arrest. After obtaining a warrant to search Orr's home, a manuscript for a novel written by Orr was discovered. The novel, titled Points of Origin, was about a firefighter who was also an arsonist and who derived sexual pleasure from setting fires. In one part of the book, the main character sets a fire in a hardware store that kills 4 people, including a grandmother and a 2-year-old child. Investigators now believed that Orr was responsible for the 1984 hardware store fire, which previously everyone except Orr thought was an accident. It also meant that Orr went to trial not just for arson, but for murder. At his first trial for arson in 1992, Orr was found guilty and sentenced to 3 consecutive 10-year terms. At his trial for murder in 1998, he was again found guilty and could have faced the death penalty, but was instead sentenced to life plus 20 years. At his trials, more details about his arsons emerged, including that he was responsible for setting a fire on the Warner Brothers studio lot, which destroyed part of the set of the television show The Waltons, and that he set a fire in his hometown of Glendale, which damaged or destroyed over 60 homes. A favorite tactic of Orr's was to set brush fires in the Los Angeles foothills to draw firefighters to the area so that they would be farther away from his main targets in the city, which he would set shortly after. After he was arrested, the amount of brush fires in the foothills decreased by over 90%. Some investigators believe that Orr is one of the worst serial arsonists in history, with ATF agent Mike Matassa stating that Orr set over 2,000 fires between 1984 and 1991. Orr has never admitted guilt to any of the arsons for which he was convicted, and insists that his novel was a total work of fiction. As of the time of this video, he remains incarcerated in a California state prison. It is unlikely that he will ever be released. Number 1. Echoes in the Darkness. Upper Marion Area High School is located in the small, strangely named town of King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. In the 1970s, the school's principal was Dr. J.C. Smith, a man viewed by colleagues and students alike as eccentric. Among other strange habits, Smith was known to commandeer the school's PA system to deliver long-winded diatribes on various subjects, sometimes speaking for hours at a time. Several incidents in the late 1970s, however, would shift the perception of Smith from eccentric to something far worse. Smith's eldest daughter, Stephanie, had a troubled life, becoming addicted to heroin in her mid-teens and at times supporting herself by prostitution. In 1977, at the age of 23, she married 29-year-old Edward Hunsberger, who was also a heroin addict. In September of that year, the couple, who had decided to try and turn their lives around, moved in with Smith and began receiving methadone treatments in an attempt to get clean. On February 25, 1978, the couple visited Edward's parents in the nearby town of North Wales. When they left, Edward told his parents that they would be back a little later. This is the last proven time that either one of them has ever been seen alive. After several weeks went by without contact, Edward's parents contacted Smith to ask about their whereabouts. Smith told them that the couple owed a large amount of money to drug dealers and had fled to California. At around that same time, Smith was contacted by a staff member at the methadone clinic where the couple were being treated, due to the couple missing a scheduled appointment. Smith told the staff member that he had gotten a hold of some Placadil, a hypnotic drug used to treat insomnia, and some really good pot, and he was going to try and detox his daughter himself. On August 19th, Smith was arrested in a shopping mall parking lot after police had been called to the scene by someone reporting suspicious activity. Smith, who had been wandering around the parking lot peering into cars, was found to have several loaded handguns, a hooded mask, and a syringe filled with a tranquilizer in his car. Smith attempted to explain away the evidence, claiming that the guns were for self-defense and that the drugs belonged to his daughter and son-in-law. When his home was searched, police uncovered a large stash of prescription drugs, several pounds of marijuana, security guard uniforms and badges, several gallons of nitric acid, and a large collection of pornography, much of which involved bestiality. The security guard uniforms linked Smith to the robbery of 2 Sears department stores in nearby malls. In both robberies, a man, who resembled Smith, had posed as a security guard who was there to collect the day's receipts. Smith was found guilty at his trial in March, but was freed on bail while awaiting his conviction. The news of Smith's criminal activities, the disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law, the bizarre items found in his home, and the long-standing rumor of his fascination with Satanism led to some staff members at the school to begin privately referring to him by a new nickname, the Prince of Darkness. One staff member at the school was William Bradfield, the head of the English department. He had testified on Smith's behalf at his trial, attempting to provide him with an alibi for one of the robberies. Bradfield was dating Susan Reinhardt, an English teacher at the school, who was a recently divorced woman with 2 young children. Reinhardt was a quiet and reserved woman who did not mind Bradfield's suggestion that they keep their relationship a secret. Bradfield frequently denied to their colleagues that he and Reinhardt were romantically involved at all, which was in his best interest, as during the time he was dating Reinhardt, he was already living with another teacher at the school, Susan Myers. While carrying on relationships with both Reinhardt and Myers, Bradfield somehow found the time to date 2 other women as well, one of which was a former student. By 1979, despite the fact that he was still living with Myers, Reinhardt began telling friends that she and Bradfield would soon be married. She made Bradfield the sole beneficiary of her life insurance and withdrew $25,000 in cash from her bank account, which she gave to Bradfield to invest on her behalf. At around this same time, Bradfield began telling 2 other teachers at the school, Vince Valaitis and Chris Pappas, that he feared something terrible was going to happen to Susan Reinhardt. Bradfield told Valaitis and Pappas that Jay Smith had killed his daughter and son-in-law and had gotten rid of their bodies by cutting them into small pieces and disposing of them in the school's dumpsters. He said that Smith and Reinhardt had been having an affair, and that the sadistic, Satan-worshipping Smith planned to end it by killing her. He said that Smith was a skilled hitman who knew how to take any household item and kill a person with it. He claimed that Smith, who was a retired Air Force colonel, had connections to intelligence services, the mafia, and the local police, and thus they could not go to the authorities. Bradfield had Pappas manufacture a pistol silencer out of an oil filter, which he said they may have to use to protect Reinhardt from Smith. On June 22, 1979, during a freak hailstorm, neighbors observed Reinhardt and her 2 children, 11-year-old Karen and 10-year-old Michael, quickly leave their home and drive away in Reinhardt's car. That same night, Bradfield insisted that Myers, Pappas, and Valaitis accompany him on a trip to the Jersey Shore. He told them that he had followed Smith in his car, as Smith had driven around Reinhardt's neighborhood, but lost him in the hailstorm. He said they needed to go to the Jersey Shore because he feared that this was the weekend when Smith was going to kill Reinhardt, and he needed an alibi because he believed Smith would try to frame him for her murder. On the 24th, Bradfield learned that Smith had been taken to jail as a result of his earlier convictions for robbery and drug possession. He told his friends that with Smith in jail, Reinhardt was finally safe. At around 5 a.m. on June 25th, a man, who has never been identified, placed a phone call to police from a payphone in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to report a sick woman in the trunk of a car in a motel parking lot. Authorities arrived and discovered the dead body of Reinhardt in the trunk of her own car. She was nude, wrapped in heavy chains, and had been beaten severely and killed with an injection of morphine, which had happened anywhere between 24 and 36 hours after the beating. There was no sign of her children at the scene, and they have never been located. In 1981, Bradfield was arrested and charged with misappropriating Reinhardt's money, specifically the $25,000 she had given him for what turned out to be a bogus investment. While awaiting trial in the case, Bradfield attempted to collect the life insurance policy he had taken out on her. He was released in 1983, but rearrested shortly afterward in relation to her murder and her children's disappearance. Authorities had no physical evidence to tie Bradfield to Reinhardt's murder. Underneath her body, They had found a comb which belonged to J. Smith, and in Smith's car, they found a pin which belonged to Reinhardt's daughter, Karen. They believed that Smith had committed the murders, but that the murders were orchestrated by Bradfield. In 1983, Bradfield was sentenced to 3 life sentences for murder. Smith, still in prison for charges relating to his 1978 arrest, was also charged with murder in 1985 and sentenced to death. However, the story does not end there. In 1989, Smith's conviction was overturned due to what a judge termed egregious prosecutorial misconduct. Specifically, prosecutors had withheld evidence from Smith's defense team, which showed that sand from the Jersey Shore had been found on Reinhardt's body. While Bradfield, by his own admission, had been to the Jersey Shore on the weekend of Reinhardt's death, Smith could not be placed in the area. Smith also argued that true crime writer Joseph Wambug, who wrote a book about the case in 1987 titled Echoes in the Darkness, had helped convict him. Wambug paid $50,000 to a state police investigator for information, particularly evidence that would implicate Smith. Wambug never denied paying the money and said in a court deposition in the 1990s that he didn't think the book would work until something happened to Smith. Smith was freed from prison in 1992, and due to double jeopardy laws, could not be retried for the murders, even if he openly admitted them. He insisted for the rest of his life that he had been framed by Bradfield. Bradfield never admitted guilt for the murder of Reinhardt or the presumed murders of her children either. He died in prison of a heart attack in 1998. After his death, his cell was searched, and authorities found several coded writings, which have never been deciphered. They also found a photograph, which is on screen now, showing a wooded area and a stone that appears to be marking something. They believe this photo possibly depicts the gravesite of Reinhardt's children, and have appealed to the public for anyone who recognizes the scene to contact them. Many who have studied the case believe that Bradfield is one of the most skilled manipulators ever recorded. Many believe that Reinhardt, Myers, the other 2 women he was dating, Pappas, Valaitis, and Smith, were all pawns in a game he was playing, both for financial gain and simply for his own amusement. As for Smith, opinion remains sharply divided on his guilt. Some believe he had nothing at all to do with Reinhardt's murder, while others believe he and Bradfield were in it together, and that Bradfield then double-crossed Smith by planting the physical evidence which tied him to the crime. Smith died of natural causes in 2009. While officially he is innocent in regards to Reinhardt and her children's cases, police still consider him a person of interest in the disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law. Like the Reinhardt children, they have never been located and remain officially listed as missing persons. Thanks for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please like, subscribe, and check out my other videos.